In.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Are you going to record? I guess
It's recording now,
it's
actually.
recording now. Perfect. Well, hello, everyone. It's Tad Hargrave from Marketing for Hippies. I'm here with Greg Faxon. He's back. We had a conversation, I guess, a few years ago now, which is a strange thing to say. And the conversation today, the context is, of course, the whole COVID-19 situation and how to deal with it, particularly when people, when you're talking with somebody who might be a client and they say, I can't afford it, I don't know if I can afford it, and how to deal with that. Because that one is tricky in the best of times, for anyone who's a sort of conscious hippie entrepreneur to kind of grapple with the, how do you engage with that in a way that's ethical, that's not manipulative, that's not pushy. Because the temptation could just be say, oh, well, they said they can't afford it. And so then as if that's the end of it, the conversation, and you just literally stop talking and, slowly back out the room because you wouldn't want to impose on them. But of course, we can be more human and creative than this in a conversation. And just because they say they can't afford it, it doesn't necessarily mean they won't do it, but it is information. And during this time, this becomes a heightened something because a lot of people losing their jobs. And anyway, so Greg and I are just kind of here to wonder about that particular question, how to contend with that moment when somebody says, I can't afford it, I don't think I can afford it, in a way that's ethical, that's kind, that's going to deepen connection and trust, not end it forever. So Greg, thank you so much for being here with me. And so maybe I'll just a little introduction of Greg. Came across Greg years ago because he had written a blog post basically like why you don't need niching and here's 11 things to do instead. And when I first saw the headline, I was like, who is this upstart criticizing niching? But I actually really liked what he had to say in the article. And that led to some conversations that turned out he really helped people with sales, particularly helping people figure out how to sell bigger packages, which is something I just, I wish for a lot of my clients, number one, that they would even think in their business about packaging and putting things together in a bigger way, but also then offering them. And of course, it's one thing to offer a $20 ebook or a $10 drop-in evening talk, because that's pretty easy. There's no risk. But when you're talking about thousands of dollars, now this is a different conversation, properly so for people. And it's in a lot of ways, it's not a different conversation, but the stakes are higher. And so things that might have been very low for a $10 something, because there's still risk, of course. What if this is weird? What if I end up in a circle massage, eye gazing with a stranger when in a 2-hour thing? This could happen, but it's 2 hours. So the same risks that might be present there suddenly get magnified because I'm going to spend $10,000. Whoa, a lot more reassurance, and I think connection is probably needed. So we had a conversation about that. I sell it as an ebook, the transcript of that. On my website, and people have really loved it, by the way, Greg. And so we're just here to dive into a particular nuance of this. And if you are in a place where you're trying to figure out how do I have this conversation, Greg is somebody I recommend. You can go to gregfaxon.com, Faxon.com, and check out his work. And if you're really struggling, especially if you are selling more high ticket items, I would just please go to him, not me, because this is assuming the niche is clear, the point of view is clear, there is still the conversation to be had, and that's not my primary skill. Okay, so preamble done. Greg, good to have you here.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat about this. This is really important, and I love a lot of the same challenges with marketing and sales are still present with low ticket items or a $20 ebook, right? There's a reason why not everyone who goes onto a landing page for a $20 ebook or product, everyone should buy it, right? If it's just about affordability, right? Anyone who has $20 should be able to buy that. But those issues are magnified when there's a higher ticket price or a higher ticket offering. And right. I also think that what we're seeing with COVID, the pandemic, and potential economic correction is similar in that those things don't necessarily create problems for businesses. They reveal existing problems that people were getting away with, but were underneath the surface. So for example, I might be able to get away with not having a specialty or a niche in
Mm,
better economic times and kind of get by. And
yeah.
now I might not be able to, right? And so it's not to say that, that's not to say that there's not real tragedy in businesses that are very solid businesses that
Yeah.
are being affected economically. But I think that this issue of I can't afford it, you need an answer to that. And you need a way to dance with that, whatever the outcome of the call may be, regardless of the economic times. And so this is an opportunity for all of us to grow as business owners. This is one of the things that we can grow on, is our ability to help people through their concerns at the end of a sales call.
Yeah, amen. And so, I would frame it just for everyone. To me, the very first thing to think about is the niche. That's the very first thing. If you've got that, then, in my worldview anyways, your point of view, having a clear approach, philosophy, understanding is the next thing. But then you're going to start to approach, if you have a clear niche and a clear point of view, people are going to start asking you about your stuff. So this is very interesting. Tell me more. And then here we are. So Greg, I'm curious, what do you think are the biggest mistakes people make in this moment? Here's an entrepreneur, they're talking with somebody, they've actually gone through the work, they've designed a package, they're really proud of it. They're talking with somebody, it's a fit. You help people with, I'm just thinking of somebody who's in my program, my mentorship program, Hillary, and she has a website, asleepatlast.com. It helps people with insomnia in particular. So let's just imagine, somebody like her, and then you're talking with somebody like, oh my God, insomnia is killing me. I mean, literally, I can't sleep. I'm having to take medications for the medications that, it's just, I'm a disaster. I've lost my job because of it. And you can help with this? Oh my God. So, and I said, well, but wait, what's your point of view? And she explains her point of view. And by the end of that, they say, oh my God, that's amazing. And what's the price? And she reveals the price. And let's just say it's a very high ticket price. And the person says, oh boy, okay, I don't know if I can afford it. So we've already gotten to that point. Where do people screw this up? What are the mistakes that people make?
The first mistake you've already pointed out, which is just running and then the call, whatever it is, or accepting that comment at face value and leaving it there. And so I think that the first line response to that is, what do you mean? Saying, what do you mean? And I know that's a little bit silly because they're like, well, what I mean is I can't afford it. I just told you what I mean. But
Right.
really that could mean several different things, because I can't afford it is probably the most common surface concern that could leave someone's mouth when they were trying to think through whether this made sense for them, and may not actually be related to their financial situation directly. So there's really three, and I'm actually referring to notes because I blocked this out and I sent it to you beforehand, but there's three things that I find are underneath I can't afford it. Okay. And by asking, what do you mean, you're going to be able to get some more information on where to go in the conversation. Because if you're trying to be a trusted advisor here, one of your jobs was to figure out if there's a fit, but another one of your jobs is to help them if they're unsure or if they're anxious, how they're going to move through that, what makes the most sense. So the first thing that I can't afford it could mean is it's not worth what you're charging me right now.
Yeah.
Right. So the thing that you're offering me, I don't think that it's worth the investment that you've just said. Now that is really means that you have a problem with your offer. There's not a good fit between that person and the offer, because in this case, you've done a good job conveying the value for that person, but it's not worth it for them. And so I think this is the first place to start, because if you're consistently hearing, I can't afford it, then there may be a mismatch between the investment you're asking and the offer. And so some of you may have heard this term, sell painkillers, not vitamins. I think, frankly, that's much more important now with the economic climate. We need to be selling things where there is a big problem to be solved. If you're selling high ticket, you don't need to sell high ticket. But if that's your business model and that's the transformation and the level of depth you want with people, then selling vitamins is going to be challenging right now, because there's some superfluous expenditures that people might make in better economic times that they no longer are willing to make. And so one problem with your offer is it just the investment you're asking, you just don't solve a painful enough problem. It's just not urgent enough. It's not having a big enough impact on their life. Now, something like insomnia, where someone's losing a job, that's a painkiller. That's not really a vitamin, right? A vitamin is like help you have a little bit more peace of mind during the day with a journaling habit. Like everyone would benefit from that, but I'm probably not going to spend 10K to learn how to journal better, right? That's a lower ticket problem for me, is not having a journaling habit. Okay.
Totally.
That could be a part of a bigger offer. So just to round this first one out, the idea that it's not worth what you're charging them, the first definition of can't afford it, you have a couple options. One is you can reduce the price of what you offer to create that match. Or the other is you could decide to solve a more painful problem with a larger gap between where they are and where they want to be to match that price. I don't recommend reducing the price as your first line, because then you end up with what Seth Godin calls the race to the bottom, right? Where you're constantly just trying to compete on price. If what you want is a higher ticket business model.
Right. So just to pause here. So what we're saying is, in this first example, you've really done the education. I mean, let's say you had an intro workshop. So they really do have a sense of what your point of view is. You really have walked them through everything that's included in the package, and even seeing all of that, even knowing in detail. And they've asked a lot of good probing questions. They weren't defensive necessarily, but they get to a point where, and you can tell they get it. They understand what the hell it is. They know who it's for. They know it's for basically somebody like them. They see the price, they see what's included, and at that point, they just make a decision. They say, based on what you've said, and you're thinking, I can't say it any better. That's as clear as it's going to be. They're still saying, I can't afford it. So that's good to know. That is a possible situation. And I would agree that and I know that sometimes people have that feeling of like, oh, but wait, going for the pain is manipulative. That's funny. Actually, Greg, you'd like this. I had a conversation with she's written a book about marketing, and I was connected with by a colleague, and it took a year for us to actually get on the phone. I just was so swamped. And finally we did. I read her book before, and I said, I just have some concerns actually about the content, that some of it seems a little manipulative. But finally I asked her, so what do you think? Because she kept referencing, I think there's a dark side of marketing and a light side of marketing. And I said, well, what do you see as how would you articulate the difference? She said, well, the dark side is using more fear and, the pain and all this, whereas the light side is more possibility and hope and all this. And I were on a Zoom call. I looked at her, I was like, do you think you can't manipulate people with possibility? Like, maybe that's most of marketing, is actually, don't you deserve to be on the beach? Like, so that's the very first thing. If you have any sense of like, oh, but speaking to somebody's problems is manipulative, well, both sides could be manipulated. It's not the positive or negative.
It's just the situation that exists for them and what they're being motivated by. Now you could twist that, whether it's a positive or a negative motivation.
Yeah, exactly.
That's well said.
Doesn't it hurt, and sticking the knife and twist it, and aren't you a terrible person if you don't deal with it? You could do that. And you could play on the shame of, oh, aren't you worth it? Don't you deserve? With the positive, you could. But fundamentally, the difference here is your intention to see if it's a fit, or is the intention to get the sale? If your intention is to get the sale, I don't care how you do it. It's going to be manipulative, positive or negative. And the other thing is, we're talking about real problems. Of course, one of the big issues with the whole advertising age is the manufacturing of problems, don't you want to be a good housewife, and all these things that get sort of put in people's heads. They're not even real. And so that's not ethical. But we're talking about somebody has a very real situation. I can't sleep. I lost my job. I might be going through a divorce because whatever, this lack of sleep has real significance. So there are people who do have real problems in their life, and those people do need help. And then, of course, what you decide to charge is up to you in terms of what is going to be sustainable for you genuinely, given what's in the package and accessible to them. And, there's a whole separate conversation, but I just wanted to name those things on this first piece.
Thank you. Yeah. So that's really the first one, is you've done a good job conveying the value, but there's a mismatch. And I'll give you a specific example. When people apply for a consult with me, there is a place where they can put what their target monthly profit is. And if people put anything under 5K per month, my assistant will respond and say, hey, we thank you for your application. we noticed that your revenue goal was this. So I just want to let you know that this is the price of working with Greg and the way that you've applied for it. Does that make sense to you? Does that feel like it's doable for you?
That's
Because
beautiful.
what I've realized is that if they're at a certain revenue goal, there's going to be a mismatch. It's not going to make sense. The ROI isn't there. So they should do one of my courses, right? Something that's cheaper, but they shouldn't spend between 3 and 10K to work with me if they want to make 3K a month. It does, it just doesn't make as much sense. And so that comes from getting these type of objections so we can filter out, which maximizes my time, obviously, with people who are interested in long-term support. And it also saves their time as well and gets them to the better offer. But that's trying to avoid an offer mismatch. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, potential meaning of I can't afford it, is I don't see the value clearly enough. Now, this is a sales problem. Number one was an offer mismatch, an offer problem. This is a sales problem. So someone could say, I can't afford it, and they can't afford what they think it's going to do for them, or they can't afford what they think they're getting. But you may not have clearly painted that picture or helped them understand the impact of what's going on for them, right? For example, if I just can't sleep a few nights in a row a week, and it sucks for that time I can't sleep, that does suck, right? But if it's not just that, but I also realize that's actually probably what's at the core of my relationship issues right now. That's probably why I lost the job, which was a 6-figure job, right? Now I'm unemployed. I mean, now it's I'm realizing that there's a bigger impact. So if I don't see the impact or I'm not paying attention to it, it's not worth as much to me. I can't afford something that's expensive. If I see what it will get me, and again, not in a way where I'm 10xing it as the salesperson, making it bigger than it is, but I need to know the impact of something to know if I can afford it, if it's worth it to me. So number two definition of I can't afford it is I just don't see the value clearly enough. And it's not because there's an offer mismatch, it's because they haven't led a good enrollment call, the coach or consultant or provider.
Yeah. So if I can leap in here, one of my favorite definitions of marketing I heard at a Jay Abraham workshop 20 years ago, a guy named Mac Ross, and somebody in the audience said, how would you define marketing? He I don't want to, and then what he blurted out was so good. And I said it in pretty much every workshop I've done since, which is marketing is about establishing the value beyond the immediately apparent. So what that means is it's probably not immediately apparent how great what you do is. So for example, let's say you make, I was given this broom as a gift. And this is made by the same people who made the brooms in Harry Potter. They're in British Columbia. And I don't know what it costs, but I promise you, if I heard what it cost, I'd probably go, like, what? But if they told the story of everything that went into this, it's like, well, I think it's Manzanita, but they go to a certain place in the desert and they just collect it. It's on the ground. They go, and then they have to sand it, they have to polish it. And then all of this, the broom itself is a particular kind of broom. And then you can see this incredible work they've done to get it together. And they use a bit of machinery, but it's still basically by hand. And then this cord, it's just amazing. And so if I were to look at it, and let's just say this was $200, I don't know what it is, but let's just say it's $200. I might say, $200 for, are you kidding me? That's ridiculous. But then if they say, well, can you give me 15 minutes? Let me tell you the story. You might feel differently. I might. And this is, here's another example. I'll give this I did a workshop in Demet, Alberta. And the night before we had dinner at this person's house, and it was incredible. The house, the log cabin they built by hand, like pulled it with horses. It was amazing. And one of the people was wearing this vest, and it's a wool felted vest. You can see all this embroidery in detail. Now, I know a little bit about this, but if you consider the cost of this, now, of course, in a mainstream culture, we don't know the value of anything handmade. But if you start to understand what it took, because they have to buy the sheep, feed the sheep, shear the sheep, clean the wool, card the wool, spin it, felt it, all of this stuff to get that. And so everything I just said about products, this translates to the coaching stuff too. One has to be able to tell the whole story of here's what's involved. Here's everything I've put into this. Here's what you're going to get from it. it's the same thing. It's just translated. This is handcraft, but it's a different kind of craft that you're doing. And if you don't establish a value beyond the immediately apparent, I mean, this is what a good sales letter is, first of all. This is what a good, well, any kind of conversation, sales letter is just a stand-in for an in-person conversation. The sales letter tries to anticipate what they might say and then respond to it. Anyway, I could go on with examples of this, but this is a big deal. People can say, I can't afford it. And exactly as Greg says, they just, $200 for a vest? I can't afford that. Wait till you hear what went into it. And then, I've seen it too, where people have really, once they laid out everything that goes into the product, people sat back and say, basically, can I pay you more? $200 isn't enough for what went into that. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, that's a really good example. How you do that, you might be wondering, well, how do I do that? How do I make sure that their perception of the value matches the value in the high ticket program?
Mm-hmm.
A big part of how you do that in an enrollment call context is going to be less about your explanation of the offer, although it's important that you're enthusiastic and the offer makes sense, that it has value. But a lot of how you're going to do it is through questions in the beginning of the call. So not just getting clear on the problem, but again, what is the impact of the problem? What's been the cost of the problem for them? If it continues, what does that look like? Or if they reach this goal, what would be great about that? So you do have to make that stuff clear to go beyond just their first awareness of what's going on with the problem before they've ever talked to you. Okay.
And if I can also just insert there's a real difference between what Greg's saying and sticking in the knife and twisting it, because what we're trying to do is get to the truth of if it's a fit. And so if one asks, it's so funny, it's so subtle, but there's a profound difference between asking those same questions I'm asking it with the intent to get information that I can use to manipulate them to buy, to grind their gears right at the end. If you do it like that, this is manipulative. But if you're doing it to really is it this bad? I do want to know, are there any consequences of this?
Yeah.
Maybe.
And I'll honestly say it like that. I'll say, why even get to that? Why get to that revenue level? What's really going to change if you do that? Or why get support with this? Why can't you continue going on your own? You've made it X far. And I'm genuinely asking that. You could kind of ask that in a manipulative way too. So I don't know if that clarifies it, but intention has a lot to do with it. A corollary to this version of I can't afford it, where they don't see the value clearly enough, is I just don't trust that you can deliver the value, right? So that's sort of just a corollary. If I trusted you could do this for me, or if I trusted I could do it, that I would actually take action and get it done, then it would be worth it. But I don't trust that you can actually solve it. So we'll put that sort of as a corollary. And that again goes to trust building, credibility, the questions you asked, the marketing you did in the front half. I want to get through a couple things.
Sure.
It's okay with you, because I do have a hard stop. So
okay.
The third version of I can't afford it is I literally don't have access to that money, right? So that's what we assume. That's what most people assume when they first hear it, before we dive deeper with what do you mean and asking some follow-up questions. But obviously that could be a version. I can't afford it. I don't have that money in the account. And that's a marketing problem. If we had to assign it as one domain, we said the first was an offer, the second was a sales problem. The third would be a marketing problem, because you're attracting people who aren't willing and able to invest in this service. And that's going to happen sometimes. When you're selling high ticket, the bigger packages, there's going to be times where people got on the phone with you and maybe they didn't realize it would be that much, or whatever it is, and then they don't have access to the money. Now, even now, I will say this has to do with your level of comfort with this, but even now it's not the end of the conversation, because we have to ask some follow-up. So number one, we have to assume that what they really mean is that they don't have access to the money. So we have to make sure that's the case. I like to do something as well. And again, this is up to your level of comfort, but I think that there's two sides of the ethical coin here. There's the ethical coin of making sure someone doesn't do something that puts them in a bad position just so you make the sale. We all acknowledge that. So we're all going to default to that, I think, the people on the call. there's another side of the ethical coin, which is I know that when people have this problem, I believe so strongly in my solution and so strongly in the cost of the problem that I want to make sure that I help the person get it solved and get creative with that. So what I'll often ask is like, hey, just first off, like, do you trust me? And I'll ask them if they trust me. And I'll say, and this is important because you have to let them know this. I'll say, just, you know, I'm going to ask you a question if it's cool. And it's because I really care about your business and you being successful at this. And based on what you say, I may say, this doesn't make sense for you. Or I may say, we may get creative with the way we break up the payments. Or I may say, let's do this first. And then I'll ask, like, could you give me a sense of your cash situation? Like, what's your cash on hand right now? What do you really have available? Because if I know that, like, if they're going to have difficulty buying groceries next week, I'm going to probably say, you know, you shouldn't do this. If they say, well, what I have is this, and then there technically is this in this account, and I was reserving it for this, but now I realize now that we're talking about it, this is more important, right? And it may help me build the payment plan out. Hey, let's just break it in half. So you do the first half now and the first half in 30 days. I can ask them if they're open to getting creative. So that's what you do with the third concern. I think the biggest takeaway for you guys is not assuming that every I can't afford it is the third version of I can't afford it.
Greg, gold, you're dropping gold. Thank you so much for making the time to share this with us. I know you got to go. Is there anything you'd like to let people know about what you're offering, or any last words from you?
That's a great question. I just appreciate you. There's no call to action here. I have lots of free stuff on the site, but I would encourage you guys as the last word to, again, use this current situation, not as an opportunity to take advantage, but as an opportunity for you to grow as a business owner. Okay. And so before you change your techniques and use some of the techniques we shared here, the questions you could ask, make sure that you come back to that firm mindset, which is the underpinning of everything, which is your congruence with your offer. Your belief that regardless of what's happening economically or socially, that people need what you offer, and it's important. And if you don't believe that, or that it's still relevant, then change the offer. But before we do any of this, get into congruence with the fact that what you offer is valuable, it's important, and that will help make this easier because you won't hop off the call as quickly when you feel that desire for service.
Amen. Okay, so if any of you want more help, gregfaxon.com. Thank you so much, Greg, and take care, everyone.
Thanks, brother. Take care. See you, Tad. Really appreciate it, man. We'll get you this recording.
Awesome.
All right. See ya.